Hi, everybody. I'm Candid Stanisci of CFL Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. And also subscribe to Candid Stanisci 1030 on YouTube. Now on CFL Talk, joining me as usual is David Morassutti and our very special guest, Ben Grant. You've heard him do play-by-play, or at least color commentary. He asks studious questions from the press galley after Argo games. So, I'm going to take a step back today and just let the brains talk, and that'll be David and Ben. Ben, first of all, did I leave anything out that we should promote for you?
Well, you can find me on social media at Ben_Grant, and I do work for X's and Argos and Three Down Nation and whoever else I can I can convince to let me run my stories and my pieces. But hey, it's great to see you both. Frank, I haven't seen you in a long time. It's really nice to see you, David. We got to catch up a little bit the other day, but love that we are back talking CFL football. This is my favorite time of year.
Yeah, you took the words and the idea right out of my mouth. It is a great time of year. We've had a chance to see some football, the CFL. I guess to start on that, we could start on that topic. Good segue that you provided us, and that is the CFL this year is allowing people to link to every game that's played in a more of a quality format than maybe we've had before. And every single game, admittedly, the ones that aren't on television are only available to anyone live. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you know how to copy your screen, you can record it and watch it later. That's just a piece of advice I'm giving to people out there who love the Canadian Football League. Watch the games, and I know, I just suspect, David, that those games they're in Ben Grant's archive. I think you probably have an archival record of each one of those games, don't you? Come on, admit it here.
I find I have my ways. I have my ways of going back and watching tape or getting a hold of New Orleans Breakers games. But I won't divulge my secrets to you, Frank.
The truth of it is, though, it's a very exciting time of the year for people like us who enjoy football, chase it as much as we can, and then basically immerse ourselves in the game. Let me ask you, Ben, this year, now that we've had a couple of new rules, they've more or less gone from on-field specific play control penalties to more nuanced rules that maybe the fans don't even know are happening. In your own words, describe the benefit of the rules, if you think there is a benefit, what you think that is.
Yeah, they're all of the rules, like you said, they're pretty subtle changes. I think the ones that I'm interested in, I don't think teams are actually going to try and take advantage of yet. So the one that intrigues me the most is actually the rouge on kickoff plays, and I'll tell you why that's interesting to me. So as it stood before, you would occasionally see really windy days, or maybe it was after a major penalty on the convert or something like that. Team would be kicking off from like midfield and they would boot it all the way through the end zone. And that's not a rouge. Like traditionally, that wasn't a rouge before. A player had to touch it on the opposing team or had to take a knee in the end zone or touch it and have it go out of bounds. So now they've taken that away. And now the rouge rule is like how it is on punts and missed field goals. If it goes through, it's a single point. Where I think there's a tactical advantage and what I would be doing if I were a front office personnel man, I would be going out there and just try to find one of those strange guys with one of those amazing talents who can only do one thing, and it happens to be kick a football a mile. You know those golfers we see that can drive like 400 yards, but they're not on
Yep.
the PGA Tour because they're not actually very good golfers. But man, can they hit a golf ball? There are some guys like that who can just kick the skin right off the football, but have no accuracy, so have really no practical use in most football applications. Can you find a guy like that? Is it worth finding a guy like that if he gives you a 50-50 shot at maybe getting a rouge on after every touchdown? That's one that I want to chase that a little bit. And I want to see if anyone actually goes out of their way to find a guy like that. I don't know, but I think there are potentially points waiting out there. In terms of the other rule changes, there really wasn't too much that was major. Jersey changes, the alignment for field goals. It doesn't really adjust much. It's not stuff that fans are really going to notice. And then they made a rule change on a safety, and most people actually didn't even know this rule that follow the CFL. I only found this rule out a few years ago because I ran into a similar situation in a game I was coaching. But yeah, in the CFL previously, a holding penalty with the quarterback in the end zone wasn't a safety. It's a safety in every other league in the world, but not in the CFL. And now they have made that a safety. So that could have come up a couple times last year. There was the Montreal game the Argos played near the end of the season where that could have come up, but it's just not something that happens a lot. And most people already thought it was in place. So yeah, make the rule change. It makes sense because otherwise, like how it was previously, why not just hold on every play on your own 1 yard line? Because it's going to stay on the one. You're not really even going to be penalized. They don't place it back half the distance to the goal once you're already at the one. So there's nothing to prevent you from wanting to try and get away with a hold there. So I like that rule change. But like you said, they're subtle, but that means they're in a good place too. Like I like the CFL football we saw last year, and why mess with it too much? So a couple little tweaks here and there, great. We'll see if something else comes up this year. But I love the game as it's currently constructed.
Yeah, it isn't. It's You're not far off the truth for sure that there are rules that are created by the Canadian Football League that the teams don't take advantage of right away. It's like those two quarterbacks in the backfield, right? That rule became available. I think I saw it used maybe twice, three times last year. It wasn't used that much.
Yeah, and teams will find a way at some point. Some creative offensive coordinator at some point will say, you know what? And it'll be because of the way that a certain team's defending something. They'll say, hey, last time when we played this team and we ran this look, they countered it by doing this. What if this guy here was our other quarterback? Let's see how they adjust to that. And that's what it will take, someone playing around with it. But there's a fear, I think, for especially coaches that haven't really been established. There's a fear to do something really different and risk being ridiculed. You don't want to, we've seen you guys have watched some NFL games where there was a trick play that's gone horribly wrong somewhere that you've seen, and you're just like, oh, and you better be a coach with some stability if you're running something like that out there. And I think that's what people are scared of. It's really putting yourself out there. You're vulnerable when you're making gimmick plays, trying to take advantage of a rule. Because if it doesn't work, everyone's coming back to you and saying, what the heck were you thinking here?
Yeah, well, Winnipeg's pretty notorious for trying stunts. Interesting stuff. David.
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, Ben, I don't. We've talked about rules on the show before, but I don't think anybody has brought any form of entertainment to the rules, and they're doing such a deep dive. So thank you for that, because I feel like sometimes we're just like it's a. No offense, Frank, but I feel like when we talk about rules, we try our best, but we can never articulate it in the way that Ben does it. Um, but I also wonder, like when CFL players, because a lot of them that come from the states move up here, and they have to already learn the rules established in place. Do you feel like the CFL, you know, does a good job of integrating these rules and making sure that it's not too much to throw at the players, not the ones that have been here for a long time, but the ones that now all of a sudden are coming up here and they have to learn even more rules than those who have already been here for a few years?
They do a pretty good job of that in camp. They spend specific times with American players. I remember talking to James Wilder Jr. in his rookie season, and it was about halfway through the year, and we just had a few moments together. And I was asking, like, what was that like when you first got up here and you're seeing the waggle, you're learning about the 5 yard halo on punts, and he said, yeah, it was really tough because that's the guy that's been playing football his whole life, watched his dad play pro football. He's been around the game since he was a baby. And suddenly you're taking something that you believe you've had a full understanding of, and now they're sort of changing the board on you a little bit. So it takes time for a lot of these guys, but these coaches, the CFL coaches, and I think it's also one of the reasons you don't often see new American coaches coming into special teams coordinating positions, it tends to be guys that have been around or have coached in youth sports because they know how to address the rules. They know all these weird things. They practice these scenarios. Like, for example, what to do when you might need to punt it out of your own end zone in the last play of the game. That's not something most defensive backs or wide receivers have ever done in their lives before, coming up from south of the border. And suddenly they're back there standing in the end zone waiting to field a missed field goal and possibly punt it back out again. And so it just seems so strange to these guys, and they laugh about it, but they respect the game as well because they see the excitement that rules like that bring. It's, again, I love all football. I watch all football leagues. I'll watch the XFL, USFL, NFL. I'll watch Japanese football league and European football league when I can. The CFL is the best game of all of them. I really believe that. I don't necessarily think it's the highest quality. I do think the NFL still has the highest quality football, but the most entertaining game is the CFL without question. And it's some of these little intricacies that make it so exciting.
Let me emphasize the importance of what you just said. I'll underline it for everyone out there. The Toronto Argonauts of 2017 would not have won the Grey Cup if they didn't know the rule about kicking the ball out of the end zone, guys. That they wouldn't have won the Grey Cup.
It's come up so many times in big games. You see it in big moments. I don't know why it doesn't. I'm sure it happens through the regular season too. We maybe just don't notice it as much. But yeah, we've seen playoff games where games are decided on just something strange, something, a weird play that happens. And even the play last year, the Argonauts getting or clinching the East Division last year in Montreal. Remember, Boris Beatty missed a field goal, but it went out the back of the end zone for a rouge. There's Boris, like, yes, trying to kick the field goal, but he was trying to kick the field goal as hard as he possibly could, knowing that what's more important is that single point. And if he hits the field goal, great. But if he missed it, he needed it to go at the back of the end zone. And that's a kicker that's thinking in Canadian football terms, not a kicker who's just, an American that's arrived and, just trying to kick the field goal.
Yeah, I mean, that remains one of the crazier finishes because of how, we always think that if a kick is blocked or in any of those cases where a kick is missed, oh, yep, game's over. But in the CFL, it's like, no. It isn't over until there's always these little like extra things you have to think about with the way these rules are. I just think it just adds another level of entertainment that, as you mentioned, like other leagues just haven't been able to find. Right? Some people will, when you explain, like I've explained the rules, I don't know how many times to people, and they like see it as this most bizarre thing, but then when you see it happen in a game situation, it's just like, this is why it's there. It's to add an extra layer of entertainment and value to the game. That just, yeah, there's value when a kick is missed in the NFL, just because you think about like the spot that it happens and all those things, the miss. But I just like how in the CFL, yeah, a missed kick could be big, but the single point that can come out of it it just adds another layer of fun that no other league can say they have.
And it's not just the single point. It's here we are talking about special teams and rules. This is out of our comfort zone here, but I love what you brought up there, David, because this not only is the single point potentially exciting, the return of a missed field goal is got to be one of the most exciting plays in Canadian football, way more so than in the NFL. You do see it sometimes in the NFL on long missed kicks. You see it a lot in the CFL. The Argos had it done to them last year. Of course, in Saskatchewan, where it was brought all the way back for a touchdown, Mario Alford. But why that's such a great play, the wide Canadian field, the long Canadian end zone. So there's way more chance that a missed field goal is going to be fielded. But then once that returner, who's the fastest guy in the stadium, has that ball in his hands, you know who's trying to tackle him? The like 9 slowest guys on your team, the guys that were blocking for that field goal, are now on the widest field in the world for football, trying to catch the fastest guy in the stadium. And that's suddenly the risk of that field goal. So it makes you think, like, do we want to try this long field goal? It might end up 6 the other way, or maybe we get a single out of it. There's so many variables, and that's exciting. That's why I love the CFL.
Every time that option comes up to whether to kick a field goal or punt, every time that comes up, there are a lot of people that question the decision that was made. And usually it's easy to question it because if it's returned for a touchdown, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have kicked it. The whole thing about the Canadian Football League is that The rules are, take for example Ryan Dinwiddie. We all know he's a brilliant. I mean, how can he not be a brilliant coach? He won a Grey Cup. We all know he's a very intelligent guy, but even he falls short sometimes with the rules. It's a challenge. The nuanced things that you were talking about, taking risks, that I agree with you 100%. But the same is true for the rules can really defy you really easily. It's what makes the Canadian Football League even more interesting, because there's a lot that is going on that people like yourself and people who are, diehard football fans, they have a lot to chew on when they're watching the game. It's such an interesting game, having separate things. And that brings me to the point where we have some people, like with the Rouge, I've found in my walking the Canadian Football League and fans and such, that it's a pretty split camp. A lot of people don't like the Rouge. It's one of the most contested among the fans rules that the Canadian Football League has, minus the ones that are relatively new, which naturally have a lot of debate.
Yeah, that's true. And for those that don't like the Rouge, I would say that you're rewarding a team for taking a risk is what you're doing. Because like I said, it can be returned. They can easily go back the other way. It's a danger. Field goals are a dangerous play for the kicking team because of the vulnerability of taking it back. So yes, you will, yeah, I know some people say you're rewarding failure, but no, you're
Yeah,
rewarding
I don't
bravery.
think so either. I
Yeah.
agree with
So
you.
I don't agree
Uh,
with
I,
those people that don't like the Rouge.
I also think in the Canadian Football League, tied to that, field position is very relevant. David, field position dictates everything in the Canadian Football League, mostly because you only get three
Yeah.
downs. So, field position is really important.
Teams, I mean, you see how many times teams have struggled to drive all the way down the field. When the team is able to go from all the way back in their own end and score on a long drive, like that probably is something the coach loves more than anything else that happens in the game, just because it takes a lot of work just to get all the way down there. And I just remember talking with Ryan Dinwiddie about this at one point last year, and they're like, we got to do better at shortening our field, because too many times where they're fielding a kick and they're not able to get the yardage that they want, and that makes it so much harder for the offense to gain any steam, because the defense knows if we pin them here, it gives our offense even better field position when they're kicking it back. So yeah, I think that's part of the game, and that's why I love the fact that the CFL doesn't have the fair catch rule, because it forces teams to try to improve their field position in that regard, rather than I'm just going to take a fair catch and make it work wherever I get the ball from. I understand why the NFL has it because of the safety concerns and all those things, but I just think it adds more excitement when you know that player who is catching the ball, he's running. Whether he's going to go far, we don't know, but it just makes again, it's that level of anticipation that the CFL continues to add with these types of rules.
And if I can jump on that, you look at Toronto. Yes, they won the Grey Cup last year, but like Frank said, like you said as well, David, and talking to Coach Dinwiddie, it was an area of weakness for the Argos last year. Like they weren't a perfect team. They were a Grey Cup winning team. I'm not sure they were the best team in the league most of the season. I think they were a very good team, and they certainly got hot at the right time. But a weakness they had was punt return, kickoff return, and that's why they got pinned deep every time. They couldn't block on punt returns and kick returns. They had guys that could return. Jeremiah Hiddell, you had Javon Leake, who was a very gifted, very skilled returner, but nobody was blocking. You watch a Chandler Worthy return, and there's no one near him when he gets the ball. You watch Javon Leake, and there were like four guys surrounding him when he gets the ball, and that was something they went out and addressed in this offseason, picking up guys that weren't necessarily big names, but guys like Mario Villamazar, who is an excellent special teams blocker, a guy that can actually get back and track and create space. And a lot of the draft picks they made in this year's draft are also very skilled at doing that exact same thing. Ife Anyeneman, for example, probably not going to play much linebacker in this league, but man, is he good at tracking guys on special teams. And then you saw it on the preseason game in Hamilton. Suddenly, guys had space. Suddenly, returners were actually able to make something happen because there weren't opposing players on their doorstep when they fielded the ball. So, yeah, that's Coach Dinwiddie recognizing, hey, we got to do something different with our return game, and that is those are the missing pieces.
Here's what I can say about preseason games. Usually the home team wins because they usually field the better players than the one visiting. So now, Ben, you're here. You're going to help us figure out what happened with the Argos and why did they lose in Hamilton, other than my simplified version of why they lost. Bo Levi Mitchell started for Hamilton. First of all, let me start with your expertise in as far as the Hamilton Tiger Cats are concerned. Overlaying him on that squad, what they had and how they can improve. How important of an addition is he, forgetting that he bites quite a bit of the cap, which sometimes it seems in the CFL isn't really a concern anyway. So I guess I'm answering my own question, but can you highlight it a little better? What's the importance of Bo Levi Mitchell being in Hamilton?
Well, I think they were good quarterback play away from being a very strong team last year. Dane Evans did not play well. I expect him to have a much better season. He just didn't really respond that well to being the guy in Hamilton, and I think we all expected him to do a lot better. He's a better quarterback than what we saw last year. I think we know that, but it didn't happen. And the rest of their team was actually pretty good. And so by bringing in Bo Levi Mitchell, who looked very sharp, and he only had 2 drives, so you can't, it's not enough to assess his play yet because last year wasn't a good season for him either. But we know historically he has been very good. He looked very good a couple days ago. So it's a pretty good Hamilton team. They have some weaknesses. They did have to cut some places in order to be able to pay the bills and to bring in a big time quarterback like Bo Levi Mitchell. They lost a lot of their secondary. They've still got Tunde Adeleke back there, but Carriel Brooks is gone. Roll is gone. They've had some turnover there. There's basically 3 missing pieces that they're going to have to try and fill in, and we'll see how well they do that. But in terms of looking at the game, the exhibition game against Toronto, I don't think Bo was the reason that Hamilton won or that Hamilton played more starters. That wasn't really the case. Toronto was super flat going into that game. They had a bad week of practice leading up to the game, and they came out and looked as flat as you could be. They just didn't look ready to play football. Um, I'm glad I didn't have to talk to Ryan Dinwiddie at halftime and got to talk to him after the game instead, because he would have just been spitting bullets at halftime to come out that flat with as many starters as they had. They were only offensively, they were down 17-0 at half. Offensively, yes, they were missing Chad Kelly, and maybe we can talk about that in a minute, but they had pretty much everybody else there except for Darius Bladek and Isaiah Cage. Pretty much everyone else was a projected starter, and they scored 0 points in that first half. Now, they did start turning over the lineup a little bit, but you just can't come out that flat. And I'm sure he lit into them, and they responded very well in the second half, albeit with second and third string guys fighting for jobs. But the reason they lost this game is because they got down 17-0, and that's because their veterans just didn't respond. They didn't answer the bell. And I expect them to come out very sharp early this week because there's so much veteran leadership in that room. They're just not going to let themselves lay an egg like that again.
David?
Yeah, I mean, it was really tough to see, how flat they were looking, and I'm knowing Ryan Dinwiddie, he's a very emotional person. I'm sure he that was not a very pleasant now film session the day after, but just being in the locker room at halftime. But I do give credit to some of the players that eventually in the second half decided to step up and realize we can't put up a goose egg here, because that, especially as the defending Grey Cup champions, if you put up a brutal performance in your first preseason game, it doesn't really bode well. Just what the coaching staff has been trying to establish right from the start of camp, which is, the Grey Cup's history now. Like you're just trying to pretty much start anew, and yeah, that was really rough watching that first half for sure.
I was impressed. I was impressed with the running game. One thing I think of the preseason as the next man up challenge. The players that get to play aren't the starters mostly, and they're playing more in an isolated version of their play. In other words, I guess, but I'll probably be challenged by the expert. But I just don't think team play in the preseason is as critical as it is individual play. And so we get a chance to see some diamonds in the rough, if you will, players who could be the next man up when something goes wrong, with a player in the lineup. And I saw some pretty interesting players that I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do, not because somebody gets hurt, but if they get an opportunity. And that's what's beautiful about the preseason game. We talked about football coming back, and this kind of football is almost like a glance into the future, right, Ben?
Oh yeah, for sure. And there were, while it was a terrible football game for at least a half for the Argos, there were some real positives there, and there were some nice individual performances. And I think that, like you said, Frank, it sometimes gets lost because they didn't necessarily play well as a team. But yeah, there were individuals that made a difference. And I think if we look at the quarterback play, for example,
Uh huh.
I want to defend Ben Holmes for a minute because he had a terrible first half, two picks, both his fault. He was responsible for the play that resulted in Curly Gittens Jr. getting hurt. Unfortunately, it looks like he's going to be okay, but that was a pretty scary moment, and that was on Holmes as well. Holmes was not supposed to be the starting quarterback that night. It was supposed to be Chad Kelly for two series. And it's so tough pregame to find out suddenly your role has changed because you spent all week knowing the script. Kelly's going to get two series. I'm probably going to go in after that. These are the plays I'm comfortable with. Here are the guys I'm going to be with. Suddenly you're the starter and you're out there against the number one defense for Hamilton. They're all their starting guys pretty much were out there, and you're playing with the guys that you're a little bit less familiar with because you've been playing with the twos all training camp, getting second team reps. And so, yeah, he played a terrible half of football. He'll tell you that too. But I've seen him through practice last season. I've seen his film going back to his college days. He's a really good quarterback. And so I'm not prepared to give up on him yet. But the way professional football works is he better deliver on Thursday because he's not going to get two passes. And so I expect a good game from Ben Holmes this Thursday, and because he needs it. Otherwise, that may be it. But then transitioning to the other guys, what a half from the other two guys. Brian Scott
He was
played out of his
amazing.
mind. Cameron Dukes wasn't normal football, but man, was it exciting football. And for him to get in there, throw a couple touchdown passes. Yeah, that was really cool to see, and just have to see the energy that a guy like that can bring. Not a conventional drop back quarterback, but man, he was all over the field, jumping, throwing, windmill underarm tosses, rugby style pitches off to the side. I haven't seen anyone play like that in a while. As a coach, I would hate it, but as a fan, man, was that fun.
You know what I said to David on the phone? We talked about Scott. I said, you know who he reminds me of? He reminds me of Ricky Ray.
Yeah, I see what you're saying with that. I think when you looked at like with
I
Brian
don't want to put
Scott's,
that big. I don't want to put that big a burden
no,
on the poor
of course
guy,
not.
right? But
Brian
it's the
Scott's just
variety of his throwing styles, right? Ricky did that really well. Like his arm angles always changed. It was part of the reason why he was so hard to beat.
yeah, and anytime you compare someone to Ricky Ray, I know you're
Yeah,
asking for people to come back on you and say, "Oh,
uh,
that's Ricky
I
Ray,"
get
but
it. He's not
no, I know what you're saying, just in terms of,
style.
having a different way to approach the game, and that's what I love that about, quarterbacks. Professional quarterbacks have largely been trained the same way, but just like a baseball player has got a different stance. In Little League baseball, we all learn to hit the same way. You've got your feet shoulder width apart, your elbows up, your bat's still. Do you see anyone in the majors playing that way? No, because they found their own style, what works for them. It's the same thing with quarterback play. These guys have all found their thing that makes them work as a quarterback, that made them successful in high school and college and now in the pros. So yeah, and sometimes someone will have a similar style to someone else, and you're not saying this is the next Ricky Ray. You're just saying his style reminds me of that guy's style.
Here's my concern about Ben Holmes. Um, Evans in Hamilton had a bad start, threw some interceptions, and I would say every week that they played, I said to David, I said, David, his head is not on right. He needs to really flush whatever's happened in the past. He's thinking too much. He's thinking too much about failure, not enough about success. That's what concerns me about players like that. I'm not predicting that for Holmes at all. I'm just saying that's where the Argos are really good. The one thing, because of Pinball being their general manager and Pinball's attitude that he spreads around the franchise, failure is acceptable in a preemptive situation before success. There's always positives. So I'm sure they'll work that out for him, and his next outing will be a little better. David?
Yeah, no, it's tough, but like that's, I mean, that comes with the position, right? You have to go through those mental ups and downs, and that's what I mean. The coaching staff is obviously going to work on that too. Um, and as you said, Ben, like, yeah, being thrown into a situation like that, it's not great. But we've also seen situations where in warm up something pops up, and you you gotta be ready to go, even if you're not expecting that to happen. So it's a learning tool, right? Now Ben Holmes has been through it. He's dealt with it. Now he knows what he needs to do to get himself into a better position. You know, if he gets it with the second go around. Like, my question here is now: do the Argos really consider what the other guys have done? Not just obviously in the game, because obviously one game shouldn't dictate everything they do at that position, but have you seen? I know, Ben. You're like the most detail oriented person when you're at training at camp watching practice. Like, does this make you consider maybe there's someone else more deserving of the backup job?
Well, I think it's open, and I think, and Coach Dinwiddie said that after the game too. He said we were talking about Chad Kelly's elbow tightness and how worried he was about that, and he said he's not. He's more worried about finding a backup quarterback, and so it's obviously an open competition. He hasn't decided any one of these guys is the guy. I'm not even 100% that he's decided that the backup is going to come from within that quarterback room. I don't know.
Uh, I agree
Maybe,
100%. He
right?
has a
So
road record for not playing favorites. His whole career, last year was the first year that the starting quarterback survived camp and was the starting quarterback.
yeah, well, he'll make the move if he feels it's going to win more football games, because Nick Arbuckle was supposed to be the guy. It was his guy, but Nick just wasn't playing as well as McLeod was. And so he's like, well, we're going to go with McLeod. And it got to a point where they felt they could even trade Arbuckle away. So, that's something that I think is a great thing to have as a head coach. Most coaches don't. Most coaches are, not that loyalty is a bad thing, it's a good thing, but there's a point where you're ultimately, you got to win football games. And if you feel like this guy is going to win more games than the other guy, it doesn't matter how much you like the other guy and how much he's your guy or plays your system. You got to win football games. And so,
Dinwiddie's a meritocracy guy.
yeah, and
He
he's
taught
great.
me
Like,
that from the first time he got here. It's meritocracy, baby. Show me what you can do, because it's not fair to the guy who does it well. Loyalty has to be, well, I guess there's different ways of looking at it. Maybe loyalty sometimes to the team takes priority over loyalty to an individual. You can be loyal to an individual who you understand the backstory more for and use that kind of judgment. But you're right, when it comes down to it, it's the good players. And I know, David, you're implying that as well, that the players that play well are the ones that are going to play, but sometimes we, media or fans, watch preseason games, and everything that matters happens in that preseason game. There's 4 days a week where the guys are practicing, where real judgment is made by the coaching staff. So we don't even see the power with which an individual, to answer your question, David, who's the starting quarterback, right? It could be Holmes, not because he didn't play well in that preseason game, but what he does during practice and what he's proven in the past and is in the bank of brains that lead that team.
Yeah, I know, and it's we've seen the Argos, when it comes to the quarterback decision, maybe not go with the play on the field, but also kind of the name behind you. Like, I think of back to when James Franklin, like, there was a lot of loyalty put towards that decision, maybe over performance in some cases. Like, also that was just, I mean, it's such a bizarre situation with that season, but like, I get you got to throw your trust behind the person you believe is going to get the job done, but you also have, it's also like, show me rather than tell me at the same time. I'm like that too. Like, you got to give the person that's, you know hungry and pushing for that job rather than someone who feels like it's going to be given to them.
And Ryan Dinwiddie's still learning a lot of this stuff too. He's still a very new head coach. He's only been a head coach for 2 seasons. We forget that because they've been so successful. But
And
yeah,
around for 4 years because of the pandemic.
right. Yeah. And so yeah, he's been in Toronto for a long time, but he's only coached 2 full seasons. And so he is learning lessons. And I think where he is loyal and where you do see his loyalty is something that developed when McLeod Bethel Thompson got upset in his first season as a head coach in Winnipeg. I think it was the second game of the season. They won in Calgary. They went to Winnipeg. McLeod was starting because Nick Arbuckle was banged up. And McLeod had a poor first half in Winnipeg and he got pulled. They put Arbuckle in. And McLeod was angry about that because he didn't feel he'd been given a real shot in that game. And the Argos went on to lose. It didn't really matter. I don't think who was playing quarterback. Winnipeg was a great team playing at home. But I think that was the last time I saw him make a move like that in game when he felt like going into the game, this is the guy that should be playing this game. Because we saw McLeod with some terrible first half performances last season, even. And we wondered, we talked about a halftime, are we going to see someone else in the second half? Is this time to see Chad Kelly or whatnot? And it never was. Not in one of those instances did he go with anyone other than McLeod because he does have loyalty to what he believes in, and he believed that McLeod was the better quarterback, was more capable of winning games, and more often than not, he was correct. They won the Grey Cup on the strength of McLeod Bethel Thompson's play throughout the season. So again, it's not that he's not a loyal person. It's he'll play the best guy, no matter who the best guy is, but he'll show you that loyalty once you've shown you are the best guy that should be there.
But it's earned, is my point. Like
Yeah.
with him, it's earned, right? You have to earn that loyalty. It's not just something. We're not talking here. Hockey general manager drafts a guy first overall, and no matter how bad he plays, they're going to put him on the first line. We're not talking about that. That's that. None of us think that's what we're defending. Anyway,
Yeah, it's always I mean, and Ryan Dinwiddie used to be a quarterback too, right? He's been in those situations. He knows what those guys. This is where his benefit of the being a former player can he can understand the mental aspect of it too, right? And that's why, um, you know, he's seemed to find ways to push the right buttons. Or how many times would people said that the Argos needed to move away from McLeod Bethel Thompson last year? He didn't, and it proved to be the right call in the end because it led to a Grey Cup. You can so I think yeah, I think that's why he gets paid the big bucks, right? To make those decisions even when, not everyone would agree with them.
I'll give you a perfect example of Ryan Dinwiddie and loyalty. It was clear if you remember, it wasn't clear. It became uh, a consideration, a concern for everybody around the Toronto Argonauts by fans, reporters, media, that McLeod Bethel Thompson wasn't coming back. And I remember asking the coach about his new quarterback. Unflinched, unwavering, instantly said he can be our starting quarterback. That to me is the kind of loyalty we're talking about, where he's seen stuff, during the whole season that he's been there, and the coach appreciates the work that he does. This is a kid. This is a kid who came here with a reputation, so he had to come first of all and prove he wasn't the person that his reputation said he was. So he had to work twice as hard to be accepted by his teammates, and I think the coach appreciated that, and that's where he showed his loyalty. So it's also about rewarding the hard work that someone gives you, and one of the biggest words that every Argo says to you, you guys know this word, right? I appreciate you. Appreciation. That is something that Ryan Dinwiddie and the Toronto Argonaut organization believe right to its root, and that is appreciation. And that, to me, is what we're talking about when we're saying loyalty. For those of you out there who maybe don't understand the nuanced conversation we're having, we're talking about appreciation, which is, to me, one leg, maybe three legs of the table that is loyalty.
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to also ask Ben, when it comes to that game. I know you're looking at the offense, but the defense, like, give them credit because it wasn't, when your offense is not performing like they should. Yeah, you don't want to give up 17 points in the first half, but I think some credit for how they were able to keep things close in the second half too.
Yeah, the defense actually I thought played pretty well the whole game. They had first of all, they weren't doing a lot of overly complex stuff because you don't usually want to show the opposition what your game plan is, and so they were running some strange coverages in strange times, like running cover three on from their own 10-yard line and stuff, and you don't usually see that in games, but. I think part of that is just to see how their guys respond to different coverages. Like here's a cover three. How do our guys play it? How do they? And they don't really they're trying to prevent a touchdown, but in what they know isn't probably the optimal defensive look to do that with because they're using it as an evaluation tool. And what you saw, especially early on in that game, is there were a lot of holes in Toronto's defense. And it's because you've got, again, guys that are gelling and getting used to where their spaces, where their zones are. And we remember it happening last year at the start of the season, too, to the Argos. They play a pretty demanding zone coverage that leaves a lot of space open underneath. And as the season got, uh, went along, they got better at closing down those gaps, at sort of being the magnet that would stick to the receiver closest to them. But early on, it's tough because you had guys just kind of standing in space, a little bit lost because the communication is just not quite there yet. And here we got the boundary side with two new players. You had Robertson Daniel and Robert Priester were both out on the boundary side at corner and halfback, respectively. No, I got that the other way around. um, Robert Priester at corner and Robertson Daniel at halfback. And yeah, they haven't worked together before. Robertson Daniels barely played as an Argo, and when he has played, it's been as a corner. Robert Priester was all over the place last year, halfback, a little bit of Sam, I think. And so yeah, it's going to take a little while, and they're going up against Hamilton's best guys, and so it made for some space. And then early on, Robert Priester got hurt, and now you've got a 21-year-old kid, kid who just turned 21, never played a single snap of college football, and there he is out there replacing the starter early in the first quarter. And he played great too. Again, there are issues, but you saw positives in that. I think the Toronto defense is going to be awesome this year. I think they are loaded up front. They've got two full starting defensive lines that you'd be happy putting out there. They've got the best three linebackers before we even get to the cover linebacker, before we even get to a Darius Pickett, who is one of the best cover linebackers in the league. But between Wyndham McManus, Enoch Mwamba, Jordan Williams, those three guys, you won't find three better middle and will linebackers in the CFL. A combination of those three guys, and how are they going to be used? That's the defense is exciting, and most of the secondary's back. The two guys missing, we know. We lost Peters to the Atlanta Falcons, and Shaq Richardson wasn't brought back, and so that's what they're going to have to work on is Robertson Daniel, Robert Priester. How can those guys replace those big losses? And everything else looks pretty good. Should be better than last year.
You talked about it a little bit. Expand on the way the Argos last year, and they're probably going to do the same thing this year, where they do in fact intentionally move players around in the secondary.
Well, they especially preseason, they like to move guys around to different spots. Is that what you're talking about, like
Yes,
different
yes,
positionally?
yes.
So they especially in training camp, you see guys playing. They do this on the offensive line. They do it a lot in the secondary, where they just bounce guys around, get guys experience at different spots. Most of the defensive backs that come from the States played corner. Most of them are corners. That's just what you typically get. And so playing a halfback spot or playing a Sam linebacker spot is pretty different. You've suddenly got two ways to go. You've got way more field to worry about. Plus, you've got the waggle, and so they want to give guys as much experience as they can. And usually, there's sort of a learning curve to it. They often will start them at corner, and then the better players, the players that show more promise, often will get moved to halfback because it's viewed as I think a more difficult position to play. Sometimes there's just a great corner, and they have a guy there, and they're just like, you know what, this guy's perfect here, like Jamal Peters, who was just, he was a great player, but he was a good corner, so they left him there. But that's what you'll typically see. And then we saw last year when guys started dropping like flies in the secondary, and suddenly you had to bring in all sorts of players. Maurice Carnell was in there, Priester was in there. We had at one point Chris Edwards going out to play corner because they had all these missing pieces. But that's where it comes back to that experimentation they do in training camp in the preseason, where they've done it before. So you're not asking a guy for the first time, hey, I know you haven't played corner since your freshman year in Washington, but you want to get out there and defend somebody. He's done it before. He's done it in training camp.
Now, do you foresee any really tough decisions that are going to have to be made with roster cuts? We obviously don't know what the salary cap situation is with the team right now, and that's usually something that has to play a factor into the final roster decision. But do you see some tough ones coming up for the Argos?
On offense, and I don't think it's going to be cap related. They've got a couple guys that they're going to have trouble protecting if they don't keep them on the roster. Deonta McMahon, who we didn't get to see much of, he was a running back that played in the fourth quarter. Man, this
Hmm.
guy's electric, and he's so much fun to watch at camp. I was wondering if they were going to put him in the game or not, or maybe try to hide him a little bit, and not show the rest of the league what he could do. He had a few carries. He got 9 yards almost every run out of nothing. There was nothing there, and he just found a way to weave his body somehow for a
Spin.
7 to 9 yard game. Yeah, man, that guy's exciting. But can you keep him? Because you've got AJ Olette, you've got Harris, you've got Adeboboye. You're not doing anything with those three guys. Javon Leake is your best kick returner, punt returner. You can't put 5 running backs on your roster. Someone's going to have to be on that practice squad. It may have to be McMahon, and I think he's going to get picked off that squad by another team willing to put him on their roster. And then BJ Bird's another guy as a receiver. He flashed. He had 2 touchdowns and he looked great. Lonnie Moore the fourth had an amazing double blue game. These are guys that we weren't even thinking about coming into this season. We had all sorts of names penciled in, but they were guys like Jeremiah Hiddell, DeMonte Coxie, and Cam Phillips. Like, those were the Americans we were talking about, not BJ Bird, who is a fantastic
Hmm.
name, by the way, especially for older Toronto sports
Yeah.
fans
And
who
what about
remember.
Hamilton the boatman?
Yeah, that's right.
Boatman on
I know.
Hamilton.
You sign a guy named Boatman and you're a Tiger Cat. That's a mistake. But yeah, BJ Bird played great, and that's another guy that probably doesn't stick if you put him on the practice roster. But who do you bump? I don't know who you bump, because I don't want to see Hiddell exposed. I don't want to see Phillips, certainly, or who's Coxie, the other guy. Like, those, you can't put those guys in the practice squad. They won't be there. So
But that's a new rule recently. The past, I think they did it last year. Or was the year before, where you could take players off practice roster. I think that was a pandemic thing. That was created because of the pandemic. And just to help with people who are watching who may not understand what we're talking about, is when a player is put on the practice roster, it's open season on him around the league. They can pick him off. They can take him. And I think that's a great rule for the players. I mean, from a player's perspective, that's an awesome opportunity where at least you don't get buried. I know what you said, and it's because the team wants to bury a guy, and we all understand that. And, but I'm just saying, from the team perspective, it's very important. What you said is very legit. But I think from a player's perspective, that practice roster affords an opportunity to players who do show that they have a shot to go somewhere. And I think that's better for our game. I think for our game, that's a great thing, Ben. And the reason it was invented was to protect teams who had multiple injuries, that couldn't bring guys back because they couldn't get across the border, blah, 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 all that stuff. But it makes for the best players in the league to get out on the field, which I'm all for.
yeah, agreed. It's certainly something the PA loves, because, like you said, if you end up on a stacked team, it just happens to be that they have great players in your positional group. You're sitting for potentially a couple of years, maybe, while you're on the practice squad, if that weren't a rule. So yeah, to be able to have another team take you, absolutely, that should be how it is. So, and the NFL's like that as well. They've got rules where you can take players off of practice squads. They're not protected the same way, and that's a smart. It's a smart player forward, way to play the game. It's a
It
more
makes the
fair way to
game
do it.
better too.
It
It makes
does.
the game better too.
Yeah, for sure.
Because then, especially in the Canadian Football League, one thing we do know, we've learned with quarterbacks, you lose a quarterback, the odds of you losing just went up exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
So replacing them is replacing players is an important next man up. We talk about it all the time with Calgary, and I think that was the biggest strength that the Toronto Argonauts had last year, is the next man up. They had, you know, they should have been crippled when they lost their starting running back. No, they weren't.
Yeah, no, they had great depth, and I think they've even got more depth this season. So they're except at the quarterback position, and that's the big asterisk. But aside from that, they're built to withstand a tough football season.
Well, if Scott is what he was in that preseason game, and if you're, if you're right about Holmes, that he deserves a little more respect and he's a little better than he may have shown. Maybe the quarterback position isn't that unsolid. It might be better than we realize. But hopefully, David, when it comes to quarterbacks in every league, we talk about this all the time. Um, Maybe with these rules, these subtle rule changes they've made, you've always been a proponent of having three quarterbacks on the sideline.
Yeah, 1,000%. I do not want to see a receiver have to throw any passes in a professional football game. You know, I just think you got them out. You have them. I understand there's roster. You have to have them, carry them on your roster. I understand that the cap, that it impacts the cap, but you also have to think about the product on the field. And do you want to tell your fans, we could have three quarterbacks, but we are choosing not to. And I don't know how many teams, obviously, the second quarterback is always the guy that has to review the 1 yard scramble too, right? Like sometimes that guy's job is is just that. We saw with Hamilton, right? How many quarterbacks they went through, and how many of them struggled because they just didn't really have the depth there, right? So I just think it just adds to the desire that you want to make sure that you're preparing yourself to protect the on-field product a little more than I think maybe other teams would think about.
Third quarterback. What do you think, Ben?
I'm a fan of not ending up in a situation like the San Francisco 49ers
Oh,
did.
geez.
So that's,
Oh my God. The
I
perfect
want
example.
I would love for you to get, but it's a cost thing, right? And it's quarterbacks are expensive, and so to have three quarterbacks on the roster, I'm all for that. But I'm all for a bigger dress roster than what they currently have too. So, but that's also a financial issue. So, I don't know. Maybe the union needs me on that bargaining table. But yeah, I would fight for expanded rosters across the league in all football leagues, because you just don't want to be in a scenario where you're putting a guy in a position that he's never played before, or putting in a guy in a position that he is not meant to play.
Not yet, anyway. To be
Right.
fair to each quarterback, San Francisco, you don't lose three quarterbacks that easily. It really has to be a series of bad luck in succession in a short time frame. But yeah, I think we all agree with that. Ben, we know the Canadian Football League, the quarterback stirs the drink. We started this conversation about talking about Bo Levi Mitchell going to Hamilton, and that's a prime example because the quarterback Evans, I watched him. If you want to talk about some of the other games that you guys had a chance to watch, I'll mention the games and the scores. We're not going to go specifically on any game, but Edmonton lost to Calgary 29-24. The Red Blacks lost to Montreal. The Ticats we talked about beat the Argos, and Edmonton at home lost to Winnipeg. And then the Riders game against the BC Lions. For me, watching Evans in that game, he looked like the guy that ended the season. I think some people forget how well he played at the end of the season because he was traded. But he was traded because of what happened earlier in the season. Ben, you defended a quarterback. In your mind, how much of it was confidence for Evans and Hamilton, and how important will it be in BC? They have a bit of a struggle from what I saw in the game. They maybe because it's a preseason, they had trouble with the offensive line. A quarterback like him needs some protection.
Yeah, I think he's a good place for him though. I think, and I don't know, I'm not inside his head. I can't say exactly what's happening, but I know that Dane Evans seemed to me to struggle with being the only guy. He was really the only option Hamilton had last year. They had a bunch of
You're
rookies
right.
behind him, and they end up with Schultz as well. And I know he's had some starts and stuff, but he's not a big name. Dane Evans was the guy. I think in BC, it goes back a little bit to how he was with Jeremiah Mazzoli the previous seasons, where we remember how great Dane Evans looked at times when Masoli was also on the roster. He's got Vernon Adams playing quarterback in BC. Vernon's supposed to be the guy. I don't know if there's going to be anybody more ready to play than Dane Evans. I expect him, if he gets in the game for BC, I think he'll be great. And you saw a little bit of that in preseason. He looked sharp. He looked really good. And that's the Dane Evans we remember from a few years ago.
His ability to drop a pass over coverage. That
Oh
to
yeah.
me, that was his biggest strength. And what was happening was last year was, instead of him throwing those, he was throwing right to the defenders, and it just seemed it wasn't his game. Maybe because he was rushed and he wasn't able to take time. David.
Yeah, no, I'm curious to see how. I mean, Dane Evans. I always thought it was a curious decision that he went to BC, but I also understand, the optics involved in trying to get rid of that contract for Fear Hamilton and all those things. So curious to see how that all shakes out throughout the year, because Vernon Adams hasn't gone full season as a starter and really been as productive as I think Montreal wanted him to be. And obviously now BC has to turn to him with the way the situation has gone there. So I'm very curious to see how that quarterback room shakes out.
Then we've got the situation in Saskatchewan. Um, Trevor Harris, a friend of this show, a former Argonaut. We all I knew him back here when he was in the quarterback room working under Ricky Ray and with Caleros. Will his maturity? I'm going on an assumption here. Again, I can't get in his head either. I agree with you, Ben. We can't get in people's heads, but what we can do is look at their history. Trevor Harris has been through a lot. He has a lot of experience. I think he might be better suited for Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I think it might be a good spot for him. I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the league. He might be the second best quarterback in the league, and we don't know what some of them can do still. We still have to wait to see what Chad Kelly's got, et cetera. But I think, in terms of proven guys, I think he's probably my number two league wide after Zach Collaros. And I think it's a sneaky team. I know some people have predicted them to have great seasons. I'm not sure I see that yet, but they're going to be way better than they were last year. I think it's a great spot for him. And we'll see what the guy he's replacing will do in Montreal and Cody Fajardo. I'm not sure that's a great roster. I think he may struggle there, and maybe Saskatchewan folks will sort of say, "Hey, you see." But yeah, who knows? Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, but we know that an MOP of a Grey Cup went to BC and literally showed us what it takes to survive, not play well, but survive. It quarterback's a tough position. Riley suffered. Man, I had so much admiration for the way he kept coming back after some of the stuff that happened to him. And we don't like to see that kind of stuff happen to quarterbacks, but that's what affects quarterbacks as far as their effectiveness is concerned. They need some protection, they need some time. And David and I talked about the one reason why Harris will be good in Saskatchewan is he releases the ball quickly. He makes quick decisions, and I think they were having problems with their offensive line. I believe Harris will help their offensive line. Not that it can't change or doesn't have to be better, but that he'll help the line by taking less time to make decisions.
Yeah, for sure. He's great at just getting the ball out quick if that's what he needs, and he'll assess that. Again, being an experienced quarterback, mature quarterback, he'll know if the offensive line is struggling, and I think they'll be better than they were last year, certainly. But if they're not, he's, I think, probably more prepared to deal with that than some other quarterbacks might be. Some just can't play that style of game. But yeah, him catching the ball, throw, catch and throw, catch and throw. He can play that way all day long if you let him.
David, the Argo quarterback, the number one quarterback so far as we know. We know who it is. You've had a chance to watch him for a year in the beginning of this year. What do you see as what he'll need to do using his set of strengths and his weaknesses? What does he need to do to be successful as far as you're concerned? Have you seen enough in practice?
It's always. I mean, we haven't seen him play. I mean, obviously, the most meaningful snaps came in the Grey Cup, but I want to see how he does with the added pressure of playing a full season, right, start to finish. Can he carry full season? It's one thing to do it in a relief appearance late in the game. it's another to do it throughout a season. It's so, and he hasn't done it in a long time too. So I want to see how can he handle the mental and physical challenges that come with that.
Ben, Chad?
Yeah, he's more than capable skill wise, and I think we've seen that in practice and in the few moments that he's gotten on the field. He's got a cannon of an arm. He's got good wheels as well. He has everything that you'd want in a quarterback. There's a reason that he was once projected to be a first round NFL draft pick before things sort of went south. A guy that beat Alabama in college, that was a record breaking quarterback in college. We know he can do all that stuff. So if the mental game is also there, and I like to think it is, this is a guy that's stuck in Toronto throughout the winter, buried himself in the playbook. I think he's going to be ready, and I think he's going to really surprise some people in terms of how good he looks this season.
Well, I'm going to blame Ben because he's so interesting. We've gone way over here, Ben. You're such an interesting guest. We had so much at the time. We just had an hour disappear. It was vaporized by your being a guest here.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't think it was me, but I'll take
I
it.
think so. I think so. And sorry, I think the vote's going to be 2-1. Hey, Ben, thank you for doing this.
Anytime. Love to talk to you guys. Thanks so much.
Much appreciated. And David, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Frank.
And you should have done the okay cut.
Was
I
that's
wasn't. I
well,
just looked at the time now. So thank you, David Morassutti and Ben Grant. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk. Airing live Mondays at 9 p.m. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Networks for CFL Talk, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer. Please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.